The myth that humans only use 10% of their brain power has been around for decades. In a study conducted, one-third of psychology students actually stated that they believed this myth was true. The most predominant factor of where this myth comes from would be the media. When people read or hear things from sources they like and tend to trust, they almost automatically believe that information. An example of this can be seen in Scott Witt's book, How to Be Twice as Smart. Witt directly wrote that if you're like most people, you're using only 10% of your brain power. Other media sources, such as movies, television shows, and even articles involved with science fiction or supernatural elements, convey to their audiences that very little of the brain is actually used. There's also a prominent scientific reason as to why this myth might have surfaced. Early brain researchers referred to part of the cerebral hemispheres as the silent cortex. This left the impression that the association cortex did not actually have a function. Of course, this isn't true, but the myth stuck around with the public. It seems relatively easy to fall prey to this specific myth because there are so many factors that make it believable that humans are only using 10% of their brain power. The first person I asked about this myth immediately told me they knew it was false. When I asked them why, it was because they had seen evidence going against the claim of the myth. As a nursing school student who had taken multiple classes regarding the brain, their education provided them with the information that allowed them to know the myth was false. They had empirical data to support against the claim. The next person I asked told me that he knew the myth was true. He specifically mentioned the movie Lucy, which reflects the myth exactly. The character in the movie is only using 10% of her brain. He didn't have any empirical data to back up his claims because everything he told me was fiction from books and movies. The last person I talked to also believed the myth was true. When I asked her why, she told me it was something she had heard while growing up, and she thought it was common sense. Her support was purely anecdotal. It seems that people who tend to believe the myth have more of an anecdotal viewpoint, as opposed to the people who don't believe the myth, and have the empirical data to support why they don't believe it.
As it turns out, humans definitely use more than 10% of their brain power. Humans use every part of their brain. The energy consumed by the brain powers the rapid firing of neurons and enables them to communicate with each other. Although it is true that every single part of our brain isn't being used all at once, most are continually active over a 24-hour period. For example, even while we are sleeping, areas in our brain such as the frontal cortex and the somatosensory areas are active. Brain imaging has also shown support against the myth. PET and fMRI imaging clearly shows that many parts of the brain are being used at many different times, depending on the task. Over the course of an entire day, just about all of the brain is used at one time or another. From an evolutionary perspective, our brains have grown in size compared to what they were originally, millions of years ago. Now our brain uses 20% of our daily energy intake. It is scientifically impossible for us to be using only 10% of our brain power based on this information. If we were using only 10%, that means that we are evolving in the opposite direction. There is so much evidence that doesn't support this myth. It's just a matter of exposing the public to all of this empirical data. Humans do, in fact, use more than just 10% of their brain. The myth that humans use only 10% of their brain has been circling around for many decades. While there are many reasons that this myth originated, now scientists and psychologists have discovered enough empirical data to demonstrate that this specific myth is not supported anymore. In fact, science has provided information to portray that every part of the brain is vital to human existence, and every human uses their entire brain.